This is Counterpoint, and I'm your host, Tanya Granic Allen. A story that has survived for nearly 3,000 years is suddenly at the center of a very modern culture war. Homer's The Odyssey, one of the foundational works of Western civilization, is back in the spotlight thanks to a major new film adaptation that has sparked both excitement and outrage. The movie has renewed interest in the ancient epic, but it has also ignited a fierce debate over whether Hollywood is preserving these timeless masterpieces or rewriting them to reflect today's political and cultural battles. Critics have accused the remake of turning one of the great heroic stories of the West into a vehicle for modern ideological messaging, while defenders argue that classic works must evolve to remain relevant. At the heart of the controversy is a bigger question. When we revisit the great works of the past, are we discovering their wisdom or trying to rewrite them to fit our own moment? Beyond the headlines, The Odyssey remains a story about courage, sacrifice, loyalty, temptation, identity, and the search for home. Why has Homer's epic endured for thousands of years? What does it tell us about human nature and the values that have shaped Western civilization? And what do we risk losing when we forget the foundations of our very own cultural inheritance? Well, today we're going to examine the controversy surrounding the new adaptation, the enduring power of Homer's masterpiece, and why The Odyssey remains one of the most important books ever written. And joining me now to do just that is Dr. Scott Masson, author of the Epoch Times series, The Odyssey, the First Great Book of the West. Scott, thank you so much for joining us. We've had you in the past, and we always appreciate your content. So thank you so much. And what better topic than on the Odyssey?
Great to be with you, Tanya. And I agree, it's a great topic on a great work,
Yeah.
and look forward to talking to you about it.
So this book is nearly 3,000 years old, and yet it still remains, after all that time, one of the most influential stories ever told. Why do you feel this book has endured? Why has Homer's epic endured when so many other ancient works have disappeared or just relegated to the dust?
I mean, part of it is uh, speculation because we don't know what works have not stood the test of time. We know that it has endured, and we have a pretty good understanding of why that is the case because the great philosophers and Homer's own, or rather the philosophers and their contemporaries, regarded Homer as the teacher of all Greece and cited Homer as an authority on virtually everything. And that's not just the sophists who cited Homer as effectively a biblical authority for themselves, but even Plato refers to him this way. Aristotle calls Homer the teacher and regarded him as an authority on civic matters and so forth. So he was regarded by the Greek and the Greek philosophical tradition, which really is the basis for the Western intellectual tradition, as the foundational text. So even in terms of we were going to want to divide literature from the intellectual tradition because of our modern biases about literature, and that it only talks about stories and feelings and values, but it doesn't talk about truth. But Homer's contemporaries regarded it very differently. They knew he was talking about matters of ethics, and he was
Right.
presenting them in narrative form so that it would influence the young, because as Aristotle said, we by nature love to imitate. We love imitations. We love watching imitations. That's why we go to movie theaters. And we are best educated by means of things that appeal to our passions. And Homer does that. And yet he fuses that in a character, Odysseus, who represents wisdom, but also truth. And so the Greek philosophical tradition makes a great deal of Homer's Odyssey in a way that I think has made it stood the test of time. And others have followed in my line of thinking on this. So in the Roman times, Virgil wrote the Aeneid based on the Odyssey, and Dante wrote his Divine Comedy, and Homer, rather Milton, his Odyssey, and Ulysses, his by James Joyce, same sort of thing. So it's not just me that's saying that Homer's work is a great work. It's a long-standing understanding that that is the case.
Welcome back to Counterpoint. We're unpacking the Odyssey. Yes, the book, but also the film. And joining me to do just that is Dr. Scott Masson, who is the author of a series that is appearing in the Epoch Times called The Odyssey, the First Great Book of the West. Dr. Scott, thank you again for joining me. We were discussing why the Odyssey is such a foundational text for Western civilization. Could you expand on that? Because I think some of our viewers may never have read the Odyssey, and perhaps after the show they may want to pick up the book and really dive into it. But for those who may be unfamiliar, what can we glean from the book?
Well, again, in line with what I said before the break, it was regarded as an educational manual by the Greeks, and in particular, we need to say a little bit about education here. Education in the modern sense is something that we do with our minds. In the Cartesian modernist tradition, it's knowledge that we accumulate or even produce. But for Homer and his world, and for the most of the history of Western civilization, education was fundamentally a moral enterprise that would involve training in wisdom and virtue, because they recognize that human beings, unlike the animal kingdom, have a moral nature, and that distinguishes us from the other animals. And Christians would add further that we bear the image and likeness of God. But the moral nature that we have is an aspect of that. And so when we read Homer's Odyssey and we see the stories therein depicted, we're not just being entertained, but our souls are being formed. And that's my own theory for Homer's Odyssey, is that it is a psychagogy, a journey of the soul. So when Odysseus is on his voyage home, he is confronting all manner of mythological monsters, which Homer's audience knows just as well as we do are not real, but they represent something. And what they represent are the temptations that human beings are prone to. So the various mythological beasts, that's Circe, the witch, and the sirens, and um, Scylla and Charybdis. I mean, we can list a whole variety of temptations and monsters that he confronts. These aren't just external temptations, they're things that tempt his passions, his appetites,
So
and draw him.
give us an example of one of the temptations and how he morally figures his way out of it.
Sure. Okay. So even in the film rendering that Nolan uses, Circe tempts the men are starving. They come ahead of Odysseus to Circe's hut, and they want to eat. And she gives them what they want, but of course, because they're driven by their temptation, their appetites, she gives them what they want. They become basically appetitive creatures. They become animals. They become debased human beings. There's nothing left of them but their appetites. When Odysseus enters the stage, he does not eat the food of Circe's. He resists the temptation, and that's because he uses his mind, his logos, to hold his appetites in check. He's a little bit more careful and wise than his fellow shipmates. And so that's the one of the temptations. Another is this episode with the sirens, and it's a very different sort of temptation, because Odysseus wants to hear the siren song and at the same time calls on his shipmates to strap him to the mast so he can't um,
Wow.
give into it. And so he's recognizing something, and that siren's call to him is to tell him that what a wonderful, great hero he is, and how they're saying to him, they're talking to him about his fame, but they're distracting him from his desire to go back to his wife and his son and his home. So they talk about one aspect of him, and they talk about him as if he were an immortal. And that's a temptation, a spiritual temptation rather than a physical temptation. He wants that temptation, and at the same time he knows that he can't resist that temptation. So there's a lot being said by Homer in all of the various details of these uh, episodes about human nature. So in my view, Odysseus isn't just a man, he represents the idealized man, and that will be the understanding that Plato will also use in his Republic, which is based on very much
Right.
the same thing.
We only have about 20 seconds, but it seems that really the Odyssey is almost a blueprint of how humans should live and how they should aspire to live to these ideals.
That's my belief, and that was why Homer was regarded as the teacher of all Greece, because they believed the same thing.
Wow. When we come back from this commercial break, we're going to discuss the film's adaptation. We're also going to discuss whether we, as a contemporary society, are we living up to Homer's ideals, or have we let all of these moral lessons fall by the wayside? We'll be right back. Welcome back to Counterpoint. I'm joined by Dr. Scott Masson as we unpack the Odyssey, the book, and the new film that has recently been released. Dr. Masson, thanks again for coming on. Just before the commercial break, we were discussing kind of these like foundational principles and virtues and moral lessons that are really interwoven and clearly depicted within the book, or within the work, The Odyssey. Uh, you mentioned that this work served as like a blueprint of sorts, of as an educational reference of how one should live and how man should live. And was done in ancient Greece. It's a foundational book
Mhm,
for Western civilization.
mhm.
Looking at our culture today, looking at society today and our civilization, have we upheld those foundational lessons?
Well, the first thing we can note is that Homer's Odyssey or his Iliad or any of the great books of the Western tradition are very rarely actually taught in schools anymore. I myself did not encounter them until I studied English literature at an advanced level in university. Even then, it was an optional course, it wasn't a required reading. It was the great works of Western civilization, I think I read in second year university. And so the question is, can you preserve something of Western civilization without reading its core text? And I think that's a rather difficult thing to do, especially when you consider that later authors, like let's say Dante or Milton or James Joyce, would have read those texts themselves and are clearly reflecting on them. How can we read Joyce or Dante or Milton or any of the other great authors that refer back to Homer if we haven't read the core text itself? I think is very difficult. Secondly, I'll note that C.S. Lewis in his work, The Abolition of Man, talks about the very problem we're identifying here, that which is that modern education tends to talk about facts and to disparage values. But values are related to our, again, our moral nature. And it suggests that they're inherently subjective. And so it says we're going to avoid those.
Hmm.
But there's no way of avoiding those things if they're actually a part of our human nature. We have a moral nature. We respond to injustice with feelings of anger. There's no way of eradicating that in ourselves. So the argument that Lewis makes is that if we can't eradicate it, then we have to do what the ancients always did, which is to train our sensibilities so that they're rightly ordered to what is true virtue, what justice is, what goodness is, what truth is, and so forth. And I'll note one further thing. In schools today, we no longer teach logic as a discipline. The law of identity and non contradiction and the excluded middle. We talk about words as if they were identifying markers but had no bearing and connection with reasoning. And so we think that names are just ways that we self identify ourselves, but they don't actually reflect upon our nature. And so there's all sorts of angry responses to people's uses of terminology. You can't say that. You can't use that word because it triggers me. It makes me unhappy and so forth. Well, at this point, we've given up the ghost. I mean, Aristotle says that if we cannot uphold the laws of logic, then thinking is impossible.
Wow.
So, have we lost the plot on this? I think it's pretty clear from what I just said. We not only have lost the plot, we don't have any means of rectifying it because the very education system does not itself propagate the teaching that is in the Odyssey and the whole Western tradition,
Can we
while still
reverse
being in the West.
Can we reverse course? I mean, as you're speaking these words, I'm thinking, gosh, I know of some of the mandatory reading in public schools, and they're like far removed from the Odyssey. Um, I also know that it seems society has become very self-centered. That a lot of these moral lessons that one
Very.
would hope to impart from reading the Odyssey, or from that early Greek tradition, that we have cast them away. A selfie obsessed culture. famous for being famous. I think you referenced this in one of your parts of this series that you wrote for the Epoch Times.
I did.
Can we
Yeah, yeah.
reverse course? Are we too far gone as a culture, as a society, as an education system? We only have 45 seconds. Big question.
Okay, well, the problem here is that the teachers themselves have not read these core foundational texts. It's not just they're not teaching them to the children, which they ought to. They themselves have not read it. So the teachers um, really need to do some sort of a recovery of their own understanding. But here, yes, I think when you read the great books, and as long as you have a capable teacher who is able to show you what is going on here, I think it's entirely possible to recover it. But again, you have to go back to good, great books, and you need to understand what's actually going on in those books. And if you don't do that, I don't see any other path. There's no precedent for doing what we are trying to do, which is to move education away from the holding on of the past towards the future, which is
Right.
what is putting us in this terrible situation where we have identity politics on both sides. We have the left with its identity politics, and now we have the right with its identity politics. The reason we have those divided camps is because we have no common human nature anymore.
Okay, we're going to talk about actually some of the identity politics when we return from this commercial break. Welcome back to Counterpoint. I'm joined by Dr. Scott Masson as we unpack the Odyssey, the work,
Mm.
and now a major film adaptation that has just been released. So, Scott, first of all, have you seen the film?
Yes, I saw when it came out
Okay,
on Friday.
I still have yet to see it. The
Yeah.
controversy, some critics are arguing that, here's Hollywood yet again taking this important work and completely destroying it and reshaping it with wokeism and ideological debates, that this is just like another woke remake. So firstly, did you find that to be the case? I still have, again, yet to see it. Um, and when we do this sort of thing, if that is the case, has the film lost the moral framework that was so apparent in the work, The Odyssey?
So Christopher Nolan's. So I'm doing a YouTube um, sort of my assessment of the film. It should appear very soon now.
Okay, what's your channel?
For
Your handle? Do you have a handle?
oh at litprof
Lit Prof.
litprof
Okay.
at litprof on YouTube. Yeah, and I'm going to say something less expansive than what I said there, which is that Christopher Nolan effectively is giving his Odyssey rather than Homer's Odyssey, which the credits to the film acknowledge at the end. It said it's based on Homer's Odyssey. So it's not as advertised. He's not giving us Homer's Odyssey. He's given us his version of the Odyssey. The characters are recognizable, but the story, the moral arc, the character of Odysseus himself are fundamentally changed in his rendering of it. Now, that doesn't mean that it's woke. The choices of various actors and so forth have led to the charges. Understandably, that's part of perhaps publicity, you might say. And it's provoked a big backlash from Elon Musk and all sorts of other people. The film is very interesting in what it does, but it adds various characters that are outside of Homer's Odyssey, like Sinon is a very marginal character. Actually, in Homer's own telling, he doesn't even appear. But in Nolan's rendering, he is a young boy, and there's a story here that I need to tell a little bit of here to make some sense here. When of Sinon and Antinous. Antinous is the real bad guy. He's the man who orchestrates all the other suitors. But when in Nolan's fictitious story, Sinon and Antinous are connected through the means of a military lot. So when Odysseus is told that he has to go off to war, he decides to decide who's going to go with him by lot. And Antinous is the son of a wealthy aristocrat, and he draws a black peg, which means that he's got to go to war. And he's afraid to fight, so he asks his servant, Sinon, the son of a servant in his household, to go in his place, and he agrees to do this. And in return, he says, my family will look after your father and will protect you, etc. And Odysseus permits the substitution. And unfortunately, Antinous's family betray Sinon's family. It's terrible. And so they take one boy, a servant who's been sacrificed by a wealthy aristocrat. In what Odysseus does in Nolan's film is he does not tell Sinon what's going on, that they're inside the Trojan horse. He's a poor boy, the son of a poor man who is not let in on the story there, and the Trojans throw their spears. They go through him. They get he's nailed literally to the side of the Trojan horse. He's a like a Christ-like figure, and he's an innocent figure, and the guilty figure inside Odysseus and others benefit from his sacrifice. And so the guilt of Odysseus, he now becomes a man plagued by guilt and PTSD and so forth, and he goes back as a man who has victimized this poor young boy, and yet the young boy gives him the charge to do to Antinous and make sure that he knows what he's done, and he goes back with a vengeance, but he is as guilty as anything. And the way Nolan presents it, that ends up undoing the whole of the Bronze Age. The whole of Western civilization is undone by Odysseus's act of treachery. So he makes Odysseus, although he's his hero, he makes him a Dark Knight like Batman. And if you want to add the final little thing in here, Sinon is portrayed by a trans actor, and the little black lot that he used, he held on to, and he stuck it in Antinous's mouth. He black pills him at the end of the
Oh,
movie, if
wow.
you will.
My
So
goodness.
there's a lot going on. It's very cleverly done by Christopher Nolan, but it is nothing like Homer's Odyssey. It is Odysseus is not an admirable man. There's no great speeches. Um, it removes the verbal aspect altogether. It's very much symbolism and visual stuff. And so I think people will like it for the entertainment value. They will be deprived of the whole educational significance of the Odyssey.
Okay, we've run out of time, but thank you so much, Dr. Masson, and I look forward to seeing the film. And of course, we have to reread the Odyssey now. Okay, take care. Thanks for watching.